In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills and vast fields, there was a place that buzzed with energy every year, the local shooting range. Known for its annual marksmanship competition, the range attracted skilled shooters from all over the region. These were men and women who lived and breathed precision, spending hours honing their craft, investing in top-of-the-line gear, and boasting about their trophies. It was a world of confidence, skill, and sometimes arrogance. On this particular day, the air at the range crackled with anticipation. Competitors had already begun setting up their stations, unloading cases filled with gleaming rifles, scopes, and other high-tech equipment. The sound of chatter mixed with the occasional, sharp crack of gunfire echoed across the open space. Among the crowd stood Clara, a woman no one expected to see there. Clara wasn't like the others. She didn't wear tactical vests or carry expensive gear. Instead, she wore a simple flannel shirt tucked into jeans, her boots scuffed from years of farm work. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her face bore the faint marks of sun exposure from long days spent outdoors. In her hands, she clutched an old rifle, her father's rifle. It wasn't shiny or new, it was weathered with scratches etched into the wood where time and use had left their mark. To anyone watching, it looked out of place among the sleek, modern firearms surrounding her. Clara hadn't come to compete. She hadn't even planned to visit the range until recently. But after finding her father's rifle tucked away in the attic, memories of him flooded back. He had been a soldier, once a sharpshooter known for his steady hand and unerring aim. As a child, Clara would sit quietly by his side during hunting trips, listening intently as he explained the importance of patience, focus, and respect for the weapon in your hands. Though she never picked up a gun herself, those lessons stayed with her. When she decided to bring the rifle to the range, it was less about proving something to others and more about honoring her father's memory. Maybe she'd fire a few rounds, see what it felt like to hold the same weapon he once prized so dearly. That was all. So, with a mix of curiosity and nervousness, she made her way to the bustling range. As soon as Clara stepped onto the grounds, heads turned, not because they recognized her, but because she stuck out like a sore thumb. Most of the shooters were seasoned professionals, their movements practiced and confident. They carried themselves with an air of superiority, exchanging knowing glances and friendly jabs as they prepared for the day ahead. Clara, on the other hand, moved hesitantly, unsure of where to go or what to do. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. A group of men near one of the lanes noticed her immediately. One of them nudged his friend, nodding toward Clara. "Looks like we've got ourselves a tourist," he said with a smirk. Another chuckled, eyeing her plain clothes and the old rifle in her hands. "What is this, some kind of antique?" He joked loudly enough for her to hear. The comments grew bolder as Clara approached the registration table. Someone muttered, "Farmer Jane thinks she can shoot with the big boys." Another added, "Bet you $10 she misses the target entirely." Their laughter carried through the crisp morning air, drawing attention from nearby competitors. Some joined in, while others simply shook their heads, amused by the spectacle unfolding before them. Despite the growing din of mockery, Clara kept walking. She knew she didn't belong here, not in the traditional sense, but she reminded herself why she had come. This wasn't about impressing anyone or winning accolades. It was about connecting with her father's legacy, however small or insignificant it might seem to these strangers. Still, the weight of their ridicule pressed down on her shoulders, making each step feel heavier than the last. At the registration desk, a young volunteer greeted her warmly, unaware of the tension brewing behind her. "First time here?" he asked, glancing at the rifle in her hands. Clara nodded, offering a shy smile. "Yeah, just thought I'd give it a try." The volunteer handed her a safety briefing pamphlet and directed her to an empty lane near the edge of the range. As she walked away, she could hear snippets of conversation following her. More jokes, more bets, more assumptions. By the time Clara reached her assigned spot, the snickers had grown louder. A man in his late 20s leaned against the barrier, separating his lane from hers, smirking openly. "Hey, Farmer Jane," he called out, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Need a lesson? I mean, clearly, someone needs to show you how it's done. His friends erupted into laughter, slapping him on the back as if he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. Clara froze for a moment, gripping the rifle tightly. She felt heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassment threatening to overwhelm her. For a brief second, she considered leaving, walking away and forgetting the whole thing. What did she have to prove to these people? They didn't know her story, didn't understand why she was here. To them, she was just an easy target for their amusement. But then she remembered her father. He had always taught her that actions spoke louder than words. If she turned and ran now, she'd be letting them win, not just today, but in life. Taking a deep breath, Clara squared her shoulders and set the rifle down carefully. She adjusted her stance, mimicking the posture she'd seen the other shooters adopt, though clumsily. The instructor assigned to oversee her lane approached cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. "All right, let's go over some basics," he said gently, clearly trying to diffuse the situation. He demonstrated how to hold the rifle properly, how to align the sights, and how to control her breathing. Clara listened intently, blocking out the jeers around her. Each instruction felt like a lifeline, grounding her in the moment and reminding her of her purpose. As the instructor finished his explanation, he stepped back and gave her a reassuring nod. "Whenever you're ready," he said. Clara exhaled slowly, focusing on the target at the far end of the lane. It seemed impossibly distant, especially compared to the close-range targets her father used to practice on. Doubt began creeping in again, whispering that she didn't stand a chance. Yet, amidst the chaos of voices and doubts swirling around her, one thought remained clear. This is for Dad. With trembling hands, Clara raised the rifle, lined up the sights, and prepared to take her first shot. Little did anyone know that single moment would change everything, for Clara and for everyone watching. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty ground of the shooting range. The air buzzed with activity, competitors firing round after round, bullets slicing through the stillness with sharp cracks that echoed like thunder. Clara stood at her assigned lane, gripping her father's old rifle tightly as she tried to steady herself against the weight of both the weapon and the mounting pressure around her. Nearby, the group of snobby shooters who had been mocking her since she arrived continued their relentless taunts. One man, taller than the rest with a smug grin plastered across his face, leaned casually against the barrier separating his lane from hers. "So, Farmer Jane," he called out again, his voice laced with mockery. "You planning on hitting anything today, or are you just here for decoration?" His friends erupted into laughter, their jeers blending seamlessly with the rhythmic pops of gunfire filling the air. Another man chimed in, pretending to squint down an imaginary scope. "Careful now. Don't want to scare the chickens back home." This comment drew even louder guffaws from the group, their amusement growing bolder by the second. Clara ignored them as best she could, focusing instead on the instructor's earlier instructions. He had shown her how to position her feet shoulder-width apart, how to tuck the stock of the rifle firmly against her shoulder, and how to align the sights with the distant target. She repeated these steps in her mind, trying to shut out the noise around her. But it wasn't easy. The constant stream of insults gnawed at her confidence, making her hands tremble slightly as she adjusted her grip. To make matters worse, the other shooters nearby seemed to be effortlessly hitting their marks. Every time they fired, their bullets struck the center of their targets with precision, earning approving nods from onlookers and quiet murmurs of admiration. These were people who lived and breathed this world. They moved with practiced ease, exuding an air of superiority that only fueled their ridicule of Clara. "Hey, maybe we should give her a handicap," one of the men joked, raising his voice so everyone within earshot could hear. "Let's move her target closer. Say, 20 feet. That ought to do it." His buddies roared with laughter, slapping him on the back as if he'd delivered the funniest joke of the year. Despite their cruelty, Clara refused to let them see her falter. She kept her gaze fixed on the target ahead, though its distance felt overwhelming. Her father's lessons played in her mind like a comforting mantra. Patience, focus, breathe. She reminded herself why she was here, not to prove anything to these strangers, but to honor her father's memory. This wasn't about competing or winning. It was about connection. Still, doubt began creeping in. What if they were right? What if she really didn't belong here? The rifle felt heavier in her hands with each passing moment, its worn wood pressing uncomfortably against her palms. The whispers and chuckles swirling around her grew louder, drowning out the sound of her own thoughts. For a brief second, she considered giving up altogether, walking away and leaving behind the humiliation that threatened to consume her. But then she glanced down at the rifle. It wasn't just any gun. It was her father's. Each scratch and scuff told a story of years gone by, of moments shared between them when life was simpler and full of promise. The thought of abandoning it now, of letting these arrogant men win, made her chest tighten with resolve. No. She wouldn't let them chase her away. Taking a deep breath, Clara steadied herself once more. She planted her feet firmly on the ground, adjusted the rifle's position, and peered through the sights. The target loomed far in the distance, its bullseye barely visible to her untrained eyes. She knew aiming would be difficult, nearly impossible, but she pushed aside the fear and focused on the task at hand. As she prepared to take her first shot, the snickering continued unabated. "All right, folks," one of the men announced dramatically, cupping his hands around his mouth like a megaphone. "Place your bets. How far off will Farmer Jane's shot be? 10 feet? 20? Maybe she'll miss entirely." His companions eagerly joined in, throwing out guesses with exaggerated enthusiasm. "You think she can hit the paper at all?" another man asked, feigning serious contemplation. "I'll bet you lunch she doesn't even come close." There, laughter rang out again, sharp and biting, cutting through the crisp air like shards of glass. Clara clenched her jaw, forcing herself not to react. Instead, she tuned them out completely, shutting her ears to their jeers and concentrating solely on the rifle in her hands. She remembered something her father used to say during their hunting trips. "A good shot isn't about strength or speed. It's about calmness. Let the rifle become part of you, and trust yourself." Those words resonated deeply now, grounding her in the present moment. Slowly, deliberately, she aligned the sights with the distant target, ignoring the trembling in her arms and the pounding of her heart. For a split second, everything else faded away. The jeers, the doubters, the pressure. All that remained was the rifle, the target, and the quiet determination coursing through her veins. With one final exhale, Clara pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, momentarily silencing the chatter around her. Everyone froze, turning their attention toward the target at the end of her lane. Even the snobby shooters stopped laughing, their smirks fading into expressions of surprise as they realized what had just happened. Clara didn't wait for their reactions. She lowered the rifle slowly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline rushing through her body. For the first time since arriving at the range, she allowed herself a small, private smile. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. She hadn't let them break her, and that in itself was a victory worth celebrating. The moment Clara pulled the trigger, a strange stillness settled over the range. The sharp crack of her rifle echoed through the air, momentarily drowning out the chatter and laughter that had dominated the atmosphere just seconds before. Everyone turned their heads instinctively toward her target, curiosity mixing with disbelief. Even the snobby shooters who had mocked her so mercilessly fell silent, their smirks fading into expressions of shock. At first, Clara wasn't sure what to make of the sudden quiet. She lowered the rifle slowly, her hands trembling, not from fear this time, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced downrange, squinting at the distant target. From where she stood, it was hard to tell exactly where her bullet had landed. Had she missed completely? Was it close to the center? Or worse, had she embarrassed herself even further? Her stomach churned with uncertainty. For a brief second, doubt crept back in, whispering cruel thoughts in her ear. What if they're laughing again? What if I've made a fool of myself in front of everyone? But then she remembered her father's voice. Calm, steady, and full of wisdom. He always said, "Don't worry about what others think. Just focus on doing your best." Taking a deep breath, Clara forced herself to push those doubts aside and wait for confirmation. It didn't take long for the murmurs to start rippling through the crowd. Someone near the target shouted, "Hey, check this out!" A few people jogged closer to inspect the result more closely, while others craned their necks trying to catch a glimpse from afar. One of the range officials, clipboard in hand, walked briskly toward Clara's target, his expression unreadable. The anticipation in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara felt like she was holding her breath. Every second seemed to stretch endlessly, each tick of the clock amplifying her anxiety. Finally, the official raised his arm and pointed toward the target. "Dead center," he announced loudly, his voice carrying across the range. "Perfect bullseye." For a moment, no one spoke. The words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. Then, almost simultaneously, gasps erupted from the crowd. Competitors who had been firing non-stop moments earlier stopped mid-motion, lowering their rifles to stare in stunned silence. Even the most seasoned marksmen exchanged glances, their faces etched with awe and confusion. The snobby shooters who had spent the entire morning mocking Clara were utterly dumbfounded. Their earlier jokes now felt hollow, their arrogance crumbling under the weight of reality. The man who had bet lunch on her failure stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. Another member of the group muttered under his breath, "No way, that's impossible." But there was no denying it. Clara's shot, a single, perfectly aimed bullet, had struck the exact center of the target. Not only had she hit the paper, but she'd done so with precision that rivaled even the most experienced competitors present. It was an achievement that defied all expectations, leaving everyone struggling to process what they had just witnessed. Encouraged by her unexpected success, Clara decided to try again. She repositioned herself, raising the rifle once more and focusing intently on the target ahead. This time, the jeers were gone, replaced by a hushed reverence as spectators watched her every move. She took her time, aligning the sights carefully and steadying her breathing. When she fired her second shot, the reaction was immediate. Another bullseye, and then another. Each round landed precisely where she aimed, showcasing skill far beyond anything anyone could have anticipated. By the third or fourth shot, the mood at the range had shifted entirely. The initial disbelief gave way to admiration, and soon, whispers of respect began spreading among the crowd. Some competitors approached Clara cautiously, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" one of them asked, his tone polite and sincere. Another simply shook his head in amazement, muttering, "I've never seen anything like it." Despite the newfound attention, Clara remained humble. She didn't boast or gloat. Instead, she offered a simple explanation. "I learned from my dad," she said softly, her voice tinged with emotion. "He taught me everything I know." Her modesty disarmed even the skeptics, and many found themselves reflecting on their own behavior earlier that day. As the hours passed, Clara continued to fire shot after flawless shot, drawing larger and larger crowds. Word spread quickly throughout the range about the unassuming woman with the old rifle who had silenced her critics with pure talent. Spectators gathered around her lane, watching in awe as she demonstrated a level of precision that left even the professionals humbled. Even the snobby shooters who had ridiculed her couldn't ignore the undeniable truth any longer. One by one, they approached her, their earlier arrogance replaced by contrition. "Look, we were wrong about you," admitted the tall man who had called her Farmer Jane earlier. His face was flushed with embarrassment as he extended a hand. "You're incredible. I'm sorry for what we said." Clara accepted his apology graciously, offering a small smile. "It's okay," she replied. "We all make mistakes." Her response only deepened the respect others felt for her. Here was someone who hadn't let bitterness take root, even after being treated so poorly. Instead, she chose kindness and understanding, a rare quality that resonated deeply with those around her. By the end of the day, Clara had become the talk of the event. People marveled not just at her shooting skills, but at her character. She hadn't come to the range seeking fame or recognition, yet she had earned something far more valuable, the respect and admiration of her peers. And though she declined invitations to join future competitions, citing her lack of interest in formal contests, she left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed her performance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the range, Clara packed up her father's rifle and prepared to leave. She felt a profound sense of peace, knowing she had honored his memory in the best way possible. The ridicule and doubt she had faced earlier that day seemed insignificant now, overshadowed by the quiet triumph she had achieved, not just for herself, but for the legacy of the man who had taught her everything she knew. Walking away from the range, Clara carried with her more than just the rifle in her hands. She carried a renewed sense of confidence, a deeper connection to her father's teachings, and the knowledge that sometimes the simplest acts of courage can leave the greatest impact. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the shooting range. The golden light bathed the scene in a warm glow, but Clara barely noticed. Her focus remained razor-sharp, her world narrowing down to the rifle in her hands and the distant target ahead. By now, the crowd around her had grown significantly, with spectators pressing closer to watch her every move. What had started as a day of ridicule and mockery had transformed into something no one could have predicted, an extraordinary display of skill that left even the most seasoned shooters speechless. With each shot Clara fired, the murmurs among the onlookers grew louder. "How is she doing this?" one man whispered to his friend, shaking his head in disbelief. Another competitor muttered under his breath, "It's like she's been practicing for years." But it wasn't just her accuracy that captivated them. It was her calm demeanor, her unwavering focus, and the way she seemed completely unaffected by the growing attention. There was no arrogance in her movements, no showmanship or bravado. She simply lined up her sights, took a deep breath, and pulled the trigger, over and over again. Each bullet landed dead center, splitting the air with a sharp crack before embedding itself perfectly into the bullseye. Some shooters began timing their own shots to coincide with hers, hoping to compare their results directly. Others stopped firing altogether, too mesmerized to continue. Even the range officials, who were accustomed to witnessing incredible feats of marksmanship, exchanged astonished glances. This was something else entirely, something they couldn't explain. As Clara prepared for yet another round, the tall man who had mocked her earlier stepped forward hesitantly. His earlier smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression of genuine awe. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his voice quieter than before, almost hesitant. Clara lowered the rifle slightly and nodded, giving him her full attention. "Where did you learn to shoot like this?" "Seriously," he pressed, gesturing toward the target. "I mean, you're not using some fancy scope or high-tech gear. That thing looks older than dirt." He pointed at the rifle in her hands, his tone now filled with admiration rather than mockery. The comment drew chuckles from nearby listeners, but Clara simply smiled. "My dad taught me," she replied softly, her fingers brushing against the worn wood of the rifle. "He was a soldier, a sharpshooter. Growing up, I used to watch him, practice all the time. He always said the key wasn't about the weapon, it was about patience, focus, and trusting yourself." She paused, her gaze drifting momentarily to the horizon, as if recalling memories of days gone by. This rifle was his. I've never really used it myself until today. Her words hung in the air, resonating deeply with everyone present. Here was a woman who hadn't come to the range seeking glory or validation. She wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone, not even to herself. She had come out of love and respect for her father, carrying only his lessons and his rifle. And yet in doing so she had achieved something remarkable, silencing her critics with quiet determination and undeniable talent. The tall man nodded slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by humility. "Well," he said finally, scratching the back of his neck awkwardly, "you sure made us look like fools today. Guess we owe you an apology." His admission drew nods of agreement from his friends, who had also joined him near Clara's lane. One by one they offered their regrets, their earlier jeers forgotten in the face of her grace and composure. Clara accepted their apologies graciously. refusing to hold any grudges. "It's okay," she told them with a small smile. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes. I'm just glad we can move past it." Her response earned her even more respect from the group, many of whom found themselves reflecting on their behavior earlier that day. They had judged her based on appearances, the plain clothes, the old rifle, the nervous stance, and assumed she didn't belong. Now, they realized how wrong they had been. Word of Clara's performance spread quickly throughout the range, drawing competitors and spectators alike to her lane. Some came to marvel at her precision, while others sought advice. "Do you mind if I try holding your rifle?" asked a young woman, her eyes wide with curiosity. Clara handed it over carefully, explaining how to position it properly and offering tips on aiming. As the woman fired a few rounds under Clara's guidance, the crowd erupted into applause when she managed to hit the target cleanly. It was clear that Clara's presence was inspiring others, breaking down barriers and fostering a sense of camaraderie that hadn't existed before. By late afternoon, the atmosphere at the range had shifted dramatically. Gone were the snickers and sarcastic comments. In their place was a shared sense of wonder and mutual respect. Competitors who had once kept to themselves now mingled freely, exchanging stories and techniques. Several people approached Clara to thank her, not just for her demonstration of skill, but for reminding them of the true spirit of marksmanship, humility, dedication, and passion. Even the event organizers took notice, inviting Clara to participate in future competitions. "You're a natural," one of them said earnestly. "With training, you could go far in this sport." But Clara politely declined, explaining that she had no interest in formal contests. "This isn't about competing for me," she said. "It's about honoring my dad's memory. That's why I'm here." Though she turned down their offer, her decision only deepened the admiration others felt for her. In a world often driven by ego and competition, Clara stood apart, a reminder that greatness doesn't need recognition to be meaningful. Her actions spoke louder than any trophy ever could. As the final hours of the event wound down, Clara fired her last shot of the day. Like all the others, it struck the bullseye with perfect precision, eliciting cheers and applause from the crowd. When she lowered the rifle for the final time, there was a moment of silence, a collective acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. A simple woman, armed with nothing more than an old rifle and her father's teachings, had silenced her doubters and inspired those around her. Packing up her belongings, Clara glanced around at the faces surrounding her. Many were smiling warmly, their earlier skepticism replaced by respect and gratitude. Though she hadn't set out to change anyone's perspective, she had done exactly that. As she walked away from the range, carrying her father's rifle in her arms, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had honored his legacy in the best way possible, not through words, but through action. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone present of a timeless truth. True strength lies not in boasting or arrogance, but in quiet confidence, humility, and the courage to rise above adversity. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the horizon with hues of orange and pink, the shooting range began to wind down. The once boisterous crowd had softened into a quieter, more reflective gathering. Clara stood at her lane, packing up, her father's rifle with deliberate care. Her hands moved slowly, almost reverently, as if she were handling something far more precious than just an old weapon. And in many ways, she was. This rifle wasn't merely a tool, it was a connection to her past, a tangible reminder of the man who had shaped so much of who she was. The transformation in the atmosphere around her was undeniable. Earlier that day, the range had been filled with arrogance and bravado, a place where skill was measured not just by accuracy, but by flashy gear and loud declarations of superiority. Now, however, the mood had shifted entirely. Conversations buzzed softly among competitors and spectators alike, their tones tinged with admiration and humility. The snobby shooters who had mocked Clara earlier were now approaching her with genuine curiosity and respect, their earlier jeers replaced by sincere questions and heartfelt apologies. One of them, a middle-aged man with graying hair, and a weathered face stepped forward hesitantly. He held his own high-tech rifle loosely in one hand, looking almost sheepish as he addressed Clara. "I've been coming to this range for years," he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "And I'll be honest, I judged you the moment I saw you. Your clothes, your rifle, and everything about you seemed out of place here. But today, you taught me something important." He paused, glancing down at his expensive firearm before meeting her gaze again. "It's not the equipment that makes the shooter, it's the heart behind it." His words struck a chord with those listening, drawing nods of agreement from nearby competitors. Another shooter chimed in, nodding toward Clara's rifle. "That thing might look like it belongs in a museum, but you handled it like a pro." "I've never seen anyone shoot like that without years of practice. How did you do it?" Clara smiled faintly, her expression calm and unassuming. "Like I said before, my dad taught me everything I know. He always told me that shooting isn't about showing off or proving a point. It's about patience, focus, and respecting the weapon in your hands." She paused, running her fingers lightly over the scratches on the rifle's stock. "This rifle means more to me than any trophy ever could. It's a piece of him, a reminder of the lessons he gave me." Her response resonated deeply with everyone present. For many of the shooters, marksmanship had become less about connection and more about competition. They spent thousands on cutting-edge gear, obsessed over stats and rankings, and measured success by the number of medals hanging on their walls. But Clara's presence reminded them of why they had fallen in love with shooting in the first place: the thrill of precision, the discipline required to master the craft, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing you've done your best. Word of Clara's performance continued to spread long after she left the range. Spectators who had witnessed her shots recounted the story to friends and family, embellishing it slightly with each retelling. "You should have seen her," one woman gushed to her husband later that evening. "She didn't say a word when those guys were mocking her, just lined up her sights and fired, dead center every single time. It was incredible." Another man described how the crowd had gone silent after her first shot, the disbelief giving way to awe as she hit bullseye after bullseye. By the next morning, Clara's name, though few knew it, was already becoming legend within the tight-knit community of shooters. Back home, Clara tucked the rifle back into its case and placed it gently in the corner of her living room. She sat down on the couch, staring out the window as twilight settled over the fields surrounding her house. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a film, each moment vivid and clear. She thought about the laughter, the mockery, the disbelief, and then the silence that followed her first perfect shot. She remembered the way the crowd had gathered around her, their skepticism melting away with each successive bullet. Most of all, she thought about her father, imagining the pride he would have felt watching her honor his teachings in such a profound way. Though Clara hadn't sought recognition or praise, she couldn't deny the impact her actions had made. The respect she had earned at the range wasn't just for her skill, it was for her character. She had faced ridicule and doubt head-on, refusing to let bitterness take root even when others treated her poorly. Instead, she had responded with grace and humility, earning not only their admiration but also inspiring them to rethink their own attitudes. Over the following weeks, the ripple effects of Clara's visit became evident. At the shooting range, conversations shifted from bragging about new gear to discussions about technique, discipline, and the importance of respecting tradition. Some competitors began leaving their expensive rifles at home, opting instead to borrow older models to test their skills without relying on technology. Others started mentoring newcomers, sharing tips and encouragement rather than judgment. Even the instructors noticed a change, remarking on how the overall tone of the range had improved since Clara's appearance. For Clara herself, life returned to its usual rhythm. She went back to tending her farm, feeding the chickens and working the land her family had owned for generations. Yet there was a subtle difference in her demeanor, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. She carried herself with the knowledge that she had stood her ground, proving not just to others but to herself that she was capable of greatness. And though she never intended to return to the range, she kept her father's rifle close, a symbol of the legacy she continued. to uphold. Months later, during another annual event at the range, stories of the woman with the old rifle were still being told. Newcomers listened eagerly as veterans recounted the tale of how a simple farmer's daughter had silenced her critics with a single shot. Some claimed it was beginner's luck. Others insisted she must have been a professional in disguise. But, no matter the version of the story, one thing remained consistent. Clara's quiet strength and unwavering determination had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed it. In the end, Clara's journey wasn't about fame or accolades. It was about honoring her father's memory, staying true to herself, and reminding others of the values that truly mattered. Through her actions, she had sparked a shift, not just in the shooting community, but in the hearts of those who had underestimated her. And while she may have walked away from the range that day without fanfare or recognition, her legacy lived on in the lessons she had taught and the lives she had touched. The months that followed Clara's visit to the shooting range passed quietly, almost uneventfully. Life on her farm resumed its predictable rhythm, feeding the chickens at dawn, tending to the crops under the midday sun, and watching the stars emerge as twilight settled over the fields. Yet, despite the return to routine, something within Clara had shifted. She carried herself differently now, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The rifle, once tucked away in the attic as a relic of her father's past, now rested proudly in the corner of her living room, a constant reminder of the day she had honored his memory in the most unexpected way. Though Clara never sought recognition or fame, word of her performance continued to spread far beyond the small town where the shooting range was located. Stories about the woman with the old rifle made their way into local newspapers, online forums, and even casual conversations among marksmen across the region. Some dismissed it as an exaggerated tale, while others swore they had witnessed it firsthand. Regardless of how it was told, one detail remained consistent. Clara had silenced her doubters not with arrogance or bravado, but with humility and skill, a rare combination that left a lasting impression on everyone who heard the story. At the range itself, Clara's influence lingered long after she had left. The annual competition became less about flashy gear and more about technique and discipline. Competitors began approaching the sport with renewed respect for tradition, often trading tips and stories instead of boasting about their latest equipment upgrades. Even the instructors noticed a change in the atmosphere. Where once there had been tension and rivalry, camaraderie and mutual encouragement now flourished. It was as if Clara's quiet presence had planted a seed, reminding everyone what marksmanship truly meant. For the snobby shooters who had mocked her so mercilessly that day, the lesson was especially profound. They had entered the range full of arrogance, convinced that success was measured by appearances, expensive rifles, tactical gear, and years of experience. But Clara had shown them otherwise. Her simple clothing, weathered rifle, and humble demeanor had masked a level of skill and determination that none of them could have anticipated. In the months that followed, many of them adopted a humbler approach, focusing less on outward displays of superiority and more on mastering the fundamentals of their craft. One afternoon, several months after Clara's visit, a package arrived at her doorstep. Surprised, she opened it carefully, revealing a hand-carved wooden plaque engraved with an inscription, "To Clara, for reminding us all that true strength lies in humility and heart." Attached to the plaque was a note signed by several competitors from the range, thanking her for inspiring them to rethink their priorities and embrace a deeper appreciation for the sport. Clara held the plaque in her hands, her eyes misting slightly as she read the words. She hadn't expected gratitude, let alone admiration, yet here it was, a tangible acknowledgement of the impact she had made without even trying. Despite the newfound attention, Clara remained steadfast in her decision not to pursue competitive shooting. To her, the rifle wasn't a means to win trophies or earn accolades. It was a bridge connecting her to her father's legacy. Every time she ran her fingers over its worn wood and scratched metal, she felt closer to him, recalling the lessons he had taught her during those childhood hunting trips. Patience, focus, respect. These were the values he had instilled in her, and these were the principles she chose to live by, Still, Clara didn't shy away from sharing her knowledge when asked. Occasionally, curious neighbors or aspiring shooters would stop by her farm, eager to learn from the woman whose story had become legend. Without hesitation, she welcomed them, offering guidance and encouragement, just as her father had done for her. She taught them not only how to hold a rifle and aim steadily, but also how to approach life with kindness and resilience. Her students quickly realized that Clara's greatest gift wasn't her shooting ability, it was her character. As winter approached, blanketing the fields in a soft layer of snow, Clara found herself reflecting on the journey that had unfolded since that fateful day at the range. She thought about the laughter and mockery she had endured, the doubt that had crept into her mind, and the moment when everything changed, a single shot that silenced her critics and affirmed her belief in herself. She remembered the faces of the people who had underestimated her, only to later offer apologies and admiration. And she thought about her father, imagining the pride he would have felt knowing that his teachings had touched so many lives. On a crisp December morning, Clara ventured out to the edge of her property, where a small clearing overlooked the rolling hills below. Carrying her father's rifle, she set up a makeshift target, a piece of plywood painted with a simple bullseye, and took her position. The air was still and cold, but she felt warm inside, grounded by the weight of the rifle in her hands and the memories flooding her mind. As she lined up her sights and steadied her breathing, she whispered softly to herself, "This is for you, Dad." When she pulled the trigger, the sound echoed through the valley sharp and clear. The bullet struck the center of the target with perfect precision, just as it always had. Lowering the rifle, Clara allowed herself a small smile. She didn't need anyone else to see this moment. It was hers alone, a private tribute to the man who had shaped her life in ways both big and small. Back at the house, she hung the rifle back on its stand and turned her attention to the plaque resting on the mantel. Running her fingers over the engraved words, she felt a deep sense of peace. Her actions that day at the range hadn't been about proving anything to others. They had been about staying true to herself and honoring her father's memory. Yet, in doing so, she had inspired countless others to do the same, to embrace humility, patience, and dedication in their own lives. In the end, Clara's story was one of quiet triumph. She had faced ridicule and doubt, risen above it with grace and courage, and left a legacy that extended far beyond the confines of a shooting range. Through her actions, she reminded everyone who crossed her path that greatness isn't defined by awards or recognition. It's measured by the values we uphold and the lives we touch along the way. And so, as the years rolled on and new generations of shooters took to the range, tales of the woman with the old rifle continued to be told. Each retelling carried the same message, that true strength lies not in showmanship or ego, but in the quiet confidence of someone who knows who they are and stays true to their purpose. Clara may have walked away from the range that day, but her spirit remained, an enduring testament to the power of humility, resilience, and love.